We fight for the principles of justice, equality, and peace when every other party sells their soul for expediency and profit. We fight because we know that a better world is not only possible, it is necessary.
I've been sitting on this NDP stuff for a while now, and I keep coming back to the same place over and over again. And the place that I keep coming back to is like, I know it sounds familiar, and you've listened to me bitch about this before, but the most dangerous thing in a collapsing system isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the managed opposition standing right beside you, telling you that it has your back. And what has happened over the last several months in the NDP, the Singh era collapsing, the Winnipeg Convention, the A.V. Lewis candidacy, the Yves Engler exclusion, all of this isn't some new phenomenon. This is a very old story. It's the same story every time, and it's what I'm going to get into today, because the NDP just held what they billed as a renewal convention in Winnipeg today. The party came in off its worst federal election results since 1993, 7 seats. Singh lost in his own riding. Official party status was gone. And they walked into the RBC Convention Center, and they talked about rebuilding, and they talked about reconnecting with the masses. They put up the banner. We saw the raging grannies singing inside. And the bigger story, though, like 30 meters away in the cold, just outside of the building, protesters holding signs that nobody inside the hall was required to, acknowledge. And the gap between those two things, what's happening inside and what's happening outside, the people who weren't even allowed to partake in the No Democracy Party's convention, that's the entire story of this, and that's the story of what this whole episode is about. Let's do like a full breakdown of like how we got here.
I'm a scrappy guy. I want to fight for people. I want to fight for the things that I care about. When someone says something that makes no sense, like when I hear Mr. Polyev talking about housing, the guy built 6 homes when he was the housing minister. That's got to be called out. When Mr. Carney is talking about giving a tax break to millionaires because they're wealth creators, how is it? And they're the folks that create wealth. Well, yeah, they sell stocks. Selling stocks and should not get you an advantage in the tax system. I think that's a problem. So things that don't sound right, the things that don't sit well with Canadians, I want to call them out. I'm ready for a debate. People can challenge me and push back on me. I'm ready to push back on people that say things that don't sit well with Canadians that are not true.
If you want to understand this convention, you have to understand what the failure of the Jagmeet Singh decade, what that meant for the NDP and what the ramifications of it were. And obviously, I'm going to be fair. Like, I know this is going to make a lot of people on the left groan because they feel like Jagmeet Singh doesn't deserve fairness. And I'm not just doing like a character takedown, because it's much more than that, because it's something more useful, which is to explain the structural position that Jagmeet Singh was operating in and why that structural position made almost everything he did functionally useless, regardless of his intentions. Because the thing about that, like with Jagmeet, and I've said this before, he's not stupid and he's not without political instinct. He understood the terrain, and you saw that in the debates about a year ago. In the English debate especially, you could see it. He came in swinging. He went after Carney on Bay Street. He went after Polyev on deregulation. He talked housing. He talked price gouging. He talked mental health. He even talked about the genocide in Gaza. And for a moment, it landed. It was smooth. And you could feel it landing, but it was very much way too little, way too late. And that's what I remember thinking. It was like, yeah, this version of this guy, this is what people had been begging for years. And again, it's just too little, too late. But this is the thing. And I last time I talked about this, I used like the combat sports metaphor because I think it's actually the most accurate one. Like when you're a fighter and you're down multiple rounds and you come out in the final round throwing bombs, the commentators always say the same thing. Like, look, they got a lot of heart out there. They got a ton of toughness. And what they're not saying is it doesn't matter anymore, because toughness and heart without strategy in the earlier rounds, in the earlier part of the fight, when it mattered, is just a better looking loss. And that's exactly what Jagmeet Singh's, farewell debate performance was. It was a better looking loss because the damage was already done, and it was done in the 4 years he spent propping up the Trudeau government through confidence agreements. It was done every time he had leverage and traded it for vague promises. And it was done when his pension was secured and he finally pulled support in a move so transparently self-serving it barely registered as political news. And it was done when the Liberals outflanked him on identity politics so completely. Trudeau literally took a knee at a protest and stole the entire narrative that Jagmeet was trying to cultivate. And the NDP had nothing material to offer in response, just because they had already abandoned the terrain of material politics and then started to abandon ground in the terrain of identity politics. And that's the structural thing that I'm trying to convey, and I want people listening to understand, is like, it's not that Jagmeet Singh failed because he was a bad person or a coward, kind of a coward, though there are very much real criticisms of his leadership that I can get into. And the point is that the NDP's structural position inside the Canadian political system, first half the Post, the media ecosystem is designed to spotlight the liberal conservative binary, a party that has spent decades trying to get elected by being less scary. That position makes the kind of politics that Jagmeet would need to pursue in order to actually matter essentially functionally impossible. Like, you're always going to be the guy yelling in a soundproof room, and the room was built to be soundproofed, and that's all by design. I guess the send-off with Jagmeet is like, I just keep going back to those last debates and how he came out swinging in the debate in the final weeks of a campaign where the polls had already moved against him massively, when he shows up as the fighter that everybody wanted him to be all along. And it was not there was energy there because it was a lame duck. He had nothing else to lose, so he was able to say the things that he might not have been able to say previously because he had to deal with the ramifications of those statements. So he was unchained. And again, it was just too little too late. And I say that with genuine disappointment, because I think there are people in this country who need the NDP to be something that they think it is, right? And it's not. And now we're somewhere between completely demoralized and essentially politically homeless. And that's a meaningful thing. And that is a material consequence of what has happened with the NDP over the last little while. So, yeah.
Hundreds of new Democrats are in Winnipeg to pick a new leader. They're focused on rebuilding a party struggling.
It's a pivotal time in our party's history.
The party right now is not at a great spot, but there's also a lot of opportunity for renewal.
The federal party bringing out its most popular provincial politician to rally the crowd.
So in order for us to have a strong Canada, we need a strong federal NDP.
But right now, the NDP is weak. It holds just 6 seats in the House of Commons, down one after Nunavut MP Lori Idlout crossed the floor just weeks ago. And the party is deeply in debt, some $13 million owing.
So looking at 2026 overall, our financial position remains stable. But again, like I said, it is tight.
And then there's the polls. A new Abacus data survey shows more than half of the respondents say the NDP is not relevant.
Right now, when we look at the polls, we see single digits, low double digits sometimes.
It'll be up to a new leader to take all of this on. Former leader Jagmeet Singh lost his seat, his party taking a moment to honor him, Canada's first racialized party leader. In total, 5 candidates are running to be the NDP's next leader. 2 have emerged as frontrunners with very different visions for the future. Edmonton MP Heather McPherson.
We see how working class Canadians are being left behind. I'm the only one in this race that is a member of Parliament and that can start doing work on day one.
And filmmaker and activist Avi Lewis.
Something is wrong in our economic arrangement in Canada, and we need a voice for the 99% to actually fight for those solutions.
Whoever wins faces a monumental task, rebuilding the party financially and trying to turn it into a competitive option for Canadians. David Thurton, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Let's talk about the Winnipeg Convention, because this is where it definitely gets. This is where the veil comes off, really, for me, and the entire time leading up to this. And I would like to spend a little time here because I think this Winnipeg Convention is actually one of the most clarifying political events in recent, left-wing Canadian history, not because of what happened inside, but because of what happened outside and what happened in the months leading up to it. And those things very much show us what the NDP actually is versus what it is claimed to be here. And so the sequences, and I want you to just sit with the sequence as I go through it, because each piece individually might seem like a procedural dispute, a bureaucratic decision, whatever. But when you lay them out together, what you're looking at is a deliberate and systemic suppression of a specific political argument, not just people, an entire argument. The argument that Canadian foreign policy, military spending, and complicity in what is happening in Gaza are legitimate subjects of debate inside the NDP's own leadership race. So going back to November 2025, author and journalist Yves Engler applies to enter the NDP leadership race. And look, whatever you think of Yves Engler's politics, whatever you think of his methods, I am a supporter. But if you aren't, put that aside to just understand that he raised over $110,000 from a grassroots base without access to the party's membership list, without any institutional backing. And that in itself is not nothing. And it is a demonstration of real material support for a platform. And his platform was nationalizing energy, nationalizing banks, nationalizing telecom, cutting military spending, ending Canadian complicity in Gaza, and explicitly anti-imperialist, anti-NATO platform. Real stuff, not vague gestures, specific structural demands, okay? So November 25th, 2025, the party's vetting committee rejects Yves Engler's application. The stated grounds are extensive. They cite harassment, intimidation, Russian state propaganda, anti-Semitism even. And this is one of my favorites, a quote, unclear commitment to the NDP, which they supported by referencing a Blue Sky account impersonating Yves Engler that had posted about running for the Greens, an account that, very clearly was fabricated. And this is the thing, none of these characterizations were tested before the members or anybody. It wasn't any type of democratic process. No member voted on whether Yves Engler should be in the race. An unnamed 3-person committee made that call, and that was it. He was done. Step 2, at the beginning of this year, January 2026, Bianca Mugyenyi enters the race, a veteran organizer, former director of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, co-founder of the LEAP, which is the same organization as the party's now leader, A.B. Lewis, along with his spouse, Naomi Klein, who is also a well-known author and journalist. By the way, which is a detail worth holding on to, right? And so Bianca comes in being very transparent about it. If the party reverses its decision on Yves, she's going to step aside. And that transparency, the vetting committee decides, is itself disqualifying. A quote, explicitly proxy candidacy, which is apparently a breach of honesty and professionalism in their mind. And she is also out. And that's the thing, because she said at a press conference that you got to keep pointing to.
I stepped forward to carry a shared vision and a shared platform that was built collectively. And that is democracy. That is a process that is democratic. And instead of allowing members to evaluate those ideas for themselves, ideas that we hold dear, that are beloved to us, through unelected decision makers, unelected people made that decision for them, for the entire party. And this year, I became the first Black woman in 50 years to seriously contest the federal leadership of the NDP since Rosemary Brown in 1975. And that matters. It matters to me. I think it matters to the many young Black women, immigrant women, moms who wrote to me, many incredulous, saying, they didn't know someone like them, someone like me, someone who spoke the way that they spoke, that they could understand, could even try. And I think that showing people that they belong in leadership really matters, because we can't have the same old polished, say nice things, do nothing. Like we need bite. And the establishment talks a lot about diversity, but by blocking the first Black woman to seek this leadership in 50 years, it shows that diversity is welcome when it protects the status quo. I'm willing to say uncomfortable things. I'm willing to say you can't solve the housing crisis while pouring billions into NATO militarism. I'm willing to say that you can't claim moral leadership while being complicit in genocide, and that we have to bring our own country into that. And I'm willing to say that you cannot promise change while defending the same systems that created the crisis. So we can't continue to offer these same old safe critiques, no matter how fierce they may sound, while voting for the same war budgets that drain our communities. And so far from being a proxy, I think what is scary is that I am not. I spent more than 2 decades organizing in social movements in this country. I'm a journalist, I'm an author, co-founded the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and directed it. I co-founded the LEAP, which many who were involved in this race are very familiar with, and launched the LEAP manifesto, got it prominent across the country. I've held a broad range of governance roles, chaired even as a student at McGill, at Concordia, chaired the Canadian Federation of Students Quebec. I built campaigns, organizations, coalitions for climate justice, economic justice, peace. I was the president of the Cuberg Concordia board of directors. I mean, what are they talking about?
And I mean, yeah, like 1,000,000%. And what else is there to say? What else is there to add? The committee's logic, as Canadian Dimension noted, meant that transparency itself became grounds for disqualification. A candidate, like another candidate who had concealed their motivations, would have had a better shot than the one that stated them plainly. And that in itself is just like, it's so ridiculous and redundant. And that is the system working exactly as it's designed. And so here we are in March 2026, the voting opens. The NDP terminates Yves Engler's party membership entirely, no right of appeal. And then 3 days before the convention, they strip Barry Weisleder's convention credentials. Anybody who knows the NDP and like activism in Toronto and in Canada, Barry Weisleder is the NDP Socialist Caucus chair. He's the chair of Socialist Action. He has been a mainstay. He's been attended federal NDP conventions for decades and decades. Kicked him out. He was gone. And again, I'm not a fan of Barry, but like, if you're going to be democratic, if you're going to be the new Democratic Party, this is democracy. How are you supposed to talk about unity? How are you supposed to talk about working together, building together, if you're banning some of the most core individuals of the party, at least the left flank, from participating? It's just a joke. It's a complete joke. So to recap, they blocked Yves Engler's candidacy. They blocked the replacement candidacy. They expelled the candidate from the party. They stripped the organizer's credentials so that he couldn't even be president on the convention floor. And then they opened the convention and talked about renewal and unity. Like, just an absolute joke. Like, just a complete and utter egregious joke. And so, just to be precise about what is actually being excluded here too, and like the reason that people are upset, who are supporters of a more radical politics, the most important thing to point out in everything that I'm going to say here is that what was being excluded was not individuals. You know what I mean? What was being excluded was an argument, specifically that Canada participates in imperialism, that the Canadian military spending and foreign policy alignments are legitimate subjects of debate, and that what is happening in Gaza constitutes a genocide, full stop, and that resistance to it is justified, legally justified. And Canada is complicit in these central core issues that anybody who is like quote unquote anti-imperialist, quote unquote anti-Zionist should absolutely not be like standing alongside the Canadian state. They should be defiantly resisting it. These things, these issues should be the core central issue to any type of NDP leadership race. That argument, that specific material structural argument, was ruled out of bounds before any member had a chance to vote on it. And the mechanism was called vetting. The function is just outright censorship. And this is not new. This is not the NDP having an unusually bad year. The pattern goes back to the party's founding predecessor in 1949. The CCF expelled 2 elected Manitoba legislators for criticizing the Marshall Plan and NATO. In 1950, Dorothy Steeves, one of the party's most experienced foreign policy thinkers, was blocked from delivering a full report at convention. The party secretary pressured her to moderate her positions before members could hear them. And what has changed? Not much. 2023, the Ontario NDP expels Sarah Jama. The specific targets change across 75 years, but the mechanism is essentially identical. And when foreign policy descent to a unjust foreign policy from an anti-imperialist position emerges inside this party, the party removes it every single time, without exception.
We have to stop the war in Iran. It is causing a lot of suffering overseas. It is causing a lot of economic pain to working people here in Canada and across North America. And not a single Canadian should ever be put in harm's way to try and defend Donald Trump's foolish Iranian war. And I'll go a step further, and I'll say no American either. No American child from the blue collar or the middle class should have to die in Iran. Let the Epstein class fight the Epstein war.
Then you see, we have Wab Kinew getting up at the convention and giving a speech about being against war, being against civilian suffering, against reckless military adventurism. And it lands and people slop it up because it's designed to land. And then you step outside and there are protesters in the cold who are holding signs with Yves Engler, with Barry Weisletter, with people who've been saying these things for longer before any of these people were even in the leadership race. A man who has been coming to these conventions for decades, a man who has been writing about injustice, Canada's complicity in imperial injustice for decades. These people they can't get through the door. And inside the hall, like on the start of day 2, we had the raging grannies. Everyone's taking photos and it's warm and the narrative is just like, it's just so wholesome. It's our wholesome big tent party and then the people that we are literally not even allowing in the building. It's the same line between like symbolic opposition and structural opposition, between the kind of dissent you can absorb and photograph and put in the highlight reel and the kind you can have, the kind that you have to manage and exclude and send outside to stand in the cold.
Avi Lewis, 39,734 votes. 39,734 votes. Please welcome the new leader of Canada's NDP, le nouveau chef du NPD, Avi Lewis.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Folks, this is a tremendous result. But even more important than the results of this leadership vote is the unity in our party. Friends, if it isn't already obvious, we are building a new foundation for our party, and we are ready to come roaring back on the Canadian political stage. After 7 months of campaigning across this country and speaking to thousands upon thousands of Canadians, here's one thing I know for sure, and I want to say it out loud. Canada, mark your calendar. The NDP comeback starts now. The NDP will start winning again because we will become that beacon to the 99%. Illuminating the darkening sky of these terrifying times with the energizing light of collective struggle. This is about all of us coming together to find our place and our power in the thrilling work of building a shared future. A government that works for the many, not the money. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Now it's time to talk about Avi Lewis. Let's talk about Avi. And obviously I want to be careful here because I think, Avi Lewis is a more complicated figure than either his supporters or his critics, including myself, tend to allow. He's not a fraud in the simple sense. He does have a track record of support for the Palestinian cause. BDS support is real and documented. He's got, a history of anti-Zionist Jewish identity, which is very real. The Leap was a real project, and it did real things. And I'm not here to dismiss any of that. But there's a record, and that record matters. And the record specifically matters right now in this current moment because Lewis is the person who is going to define what arguments are thinkable inside the NDP going forward. And that's the actual stakes of a leadership race. It's not the platforms. Platforms are downstream of a leader. The leader decides what's sayable. And that makes Lewis's record in this specific moment of pressure the most relevant data that we have. So if you go back to just 3 days after October 7th, on October 11th, 2023, 3 days after Al-Aqsa flood, 3 days after that, Avi Lewis, still in the early days, 3 days in, and Avi Lewis posted a thread on Twitter accusing, quote, some sectors of the left of callously celebrating vengeance against Israel, playing right into the hands of right-wing Zionists and others who weaponize anti-Semitism. 3 days. The solidarity movement is just beginning to figure out how to respond to what is unfolding, and Avi Lewis's first public intervention aimed not at the genocide beginning to take shape, but at the left's response to October 7th. Framing solidarity expression, not violence, but solidarity expression as a gift to the right and a vector for anti-Semitism. And that is not, the record of a man who was an ally to the Palestinian cause. This is the record of someone who first political instinct at the precise moment when the moment most needed cover and support was to police that cover and support, to distance himself from it, to invoke anti-Semitism as a charge, not against Israel's defenders, but against the protesters. That is a gatekeeper move, and it was made from inside the movement's own institutional space. Then, just a few months later, a protest of former BC NDP cabinet minister Selina Robinson, who had publicly described Gaza as, quote, a piece of land that was pretty much empty before October 7th. There was a mass protest outside of her, well, not a mass protest, a large gathering of a protest outside of her office. Avi Lewis tweets out calling it childish and gross. He warned journalists not to cover it and suggested that it was intended to, quote, discredit the movement. And Yves Engler responded publicly the next day, noting that the protest was, in fact, quite respectful. And he asked Avi directly if there was going to be an apology, and an apology never came. And of course, that's where we see who Avi Lewis is, or more precisely, who he isn't. And when Yves Engler was excluded from the leadership race, he was the only leadership candidate who went on the record to effectively justify his exclusion. And I know people are going to say, like, look, again, Avi has a BDS position. He's the best option available. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I hear that. I genuinely hear that. But the the thing about all of this is that, like, Lewis's grandfather, David Lewis, and his father that he mentioned, Stephen Lewis, are the ones who expelled the leftist waffle from the NDP in 1972. And Avi Lewis cites them in his legacy regularly. He has never distanced himself from that expulsion. And the family business, historically, structurally, over 3 generations within this political party, has been containing the left inside of the party, doing it with being left sounding, using left sounding language, making it palatable for progressives, while ensuring that the actual parameters of the debate remain safe for the party's institutional interests. And I'm not saying that this is a conscious action. I'm saying that the pattern is there, and it's worth naming, because if the fear is that the left is going to cost Avi Lewis something concrete, like as if the solidarity movement needs a PR, like it needs PR and not just like the righteousness of being on the right side of history. And when like an anti-imperialist candidate needs defending from the party that's trying to remove him from the race and completely, the machine moves against its own left flank. And Avi Lewis is the perfect person to lead that type of movement against the left. And he's consistently chosen institutional, like he's been on the side of institution every time. That's the record when it matters the most. It's just been pretty clear again. Yeah. So what does this all add up to? And I want to be honest here, because I know I could sound like a real bummer right now, and I don't want to do that. Not because I don't want to also manufacture hope where there isn't any, because I don't think there is any, especially not here in this avenue. If anything, the hope is that people see just what this party has become and how it's essentially just become the DSA, the DNC. It's just careerist politicians, careerist political advisors, careerist labor aristocracy, union figures, the fat cats, the Dick and Bonzen. That's what they are. And as I said at the very beginning, the most dangerous thing in a collapsing system isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the managed opposition standing right beside you, telling you that it has your back. And that's where we're at right now with this NDP. And it sounds cynical, but it's true. And we've been fooled before, and I'm not going to be fooled again. Watch how quick, like they flew the flag of Palestine on the stage as Yves was elected as the leader of this political party. Watch how fast they abandon that symbol. Watch how fast they abandon that movement, because it will be abandoned very quickly. Anyways, that's what was happening outside of the convention. The NDP has started their new era by calling the cops on Yves Engler.
What kind of complaint? So let the complainants file the complaint. We'll go to court. We'll have a fight in public. But you're not removing him today.
And as it all sounds very cynical, because I don't want to sound cynical, but it's important to understand the structure clearly is actually more useful than any type of false hope or paralyzed despair. And what this convention reveals, and what the lost Jagmeet decade revealed, and what the Avi Lewis candidacy and now leadership era reveals, is not that the NDP is run by bad people making bad choices. It's that the NDP operates under structural constraints that define what it can and cannot be. And those constraints are actively enforced by named and unnamed officials through mechanisms that bypass member input entirely, the entire democratic process. They have been enforced consistently for 75 years, going back to the very beginning of the party. And the thing is, and this is the thing people need to understand, that consistency is itself information. It tells you something real about this institution, what it is, and what it exists to do. Social democracy inside the imperial core is not a transitional form towards something more radical. It is a containment mechanism. It functions to absorb the energy that might otherwise build genuinely disruptive left power and channel it into forms that the system can manage. It does this because everyone involved, this is a better way to say it. It does this not because everybody involved is cynical or because they're corrupt, because most people, for the most part, up until now, very much so, aren't. But it's because there are structural incentives of operating inside the electoral system, inside the parliamentary order, inside the funding relationships and media relationships and legal relationships of a settler colonial state. Those incentives select for a certain type of politics and more specifically against another. And the NDP can criticize austerity, but not capital. It can condemn war in general terms, but not the specific alliances producing it. It can absorb symbolic dissent, but not organize around structural opposition, because it will always condemn resistance at the end of the day. And what that means for people on the left in Canada trying to figure out what to do with an NDP leadership contest in 2026 and what this means, it doesn't mean don't vote in the next election or by-election, or if you're an NDP supporter, don't not support them. It doesn't mean disengage. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Abstention is not radicalism. The system needs your apathy, but it does mean that being very clear-eyed about what we're engaging with and why and what we expect to get out of it. Voting tactically inside a managed system is a tactic. It's not a strategy. And the people who were expelled, the people who were blocked, the people who were standing outside in the cold in Winnipeg this weekend, those are the people who understand the difference between a tactic and a strategy. And they understand it better than most of the people inside that fucking building today, and inside of that party. And that's what it comes down to. It's that organizing capacity that raised money, that had a grassroots base, that showed up for Yves Engler, that showed up for Bianca, that showed up for the NDP Socialist Caucus, despite all of their flaws and faults, because I will say there are countless flaws with Barry alone. But even then, they did all of this without party membership. They did all of this without any type of institutional backing. And that energy is all still there. And now it's been demonstrated to many people that there's no path for that energy within the NDP anymore. It's been excluded from the room. And but just because it's excluded doesn't mean it's just going to disappear. The question is, what next? What builds next? And that's a question worth sitting with for a while as they debate the policy for this next NDP opposition, or not even opposition, this next NDP iteration under Avi Lewis. So yeah, we'll see what it is. I'm not going to hold my breath. Like I said, remember how they flew the flag of Palestine on the stage the day that Avi Lewis became leader of the NDP, and watch how fast they abandoned that symbol. All right, that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Talk to you later.